I am Nolan Hack. I am a Black revolutionary activist from Los Angeles, California.
I am Derrick. I am a writer and a full-time graduate student here in Texas.
Julie Dye. I'm an activist from Jackson, Michigan, water protector, anti-mascot activist.
Excellent, excellent.
So speaking of mascots, the Washington team plays tomorrow on the National Day of Mourning, or as the Palefaces say, Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch, I've never watched football on Thanksgiving. I mean, I come from a family that does, but much more of the Cowboys, like, because we're a Southern, I guess, people, so they're much more about the Cowboys than the team from Washington. But I will not be watching football tomorrow. Will you be, Nolan?
I won't. And honestly, I feel weird about football in general because I went into this season saying that, and I'm not going to boycott the league, because if I boycotted the league, the NFL, I'd have to boycott so many different things, because that, you know, in Western society, there's so many things that are attached to evil. But I found myself just not caring nearly as much. And also, it doesn't help that my favorite team is 1-8, and they're the team that let Kaepernick go. So, like, I have a horrible team who's also racist. It kind of, like, you know, ruins the appeal for me. But then the fact that, yeah, you have the Chiefs and the team from Washington, and the Dolphins, or their stadium is built on a native burial ground.
Oh,
so yeah. And they moved the remains, of course. But I mean, I guess it's like tomorrow with this holiday. I remember the last Thanksgiving that I celebrated was about 3 years ago, and we were getting ready to go to my cousin's house, and I say to my younger sister, who's about 3.5 years younger than me, I go, you know, I don't think we should be celebrating this holiday. And this is before I got all aware or woke or whatever you want to call it. But, I mean, the holiday is kind of a sham, you know, as Native people. And she's like, calm down, you're being too serious. And at the time, I didn't know the lengths of the genocide. I didn't know the lengths of there was still a genocide being perpetrated on them. And then I didn't know how bad the first Thanksgiving was. And they burned Native people alive, for goodness sake. And
Julie,
you can't understate that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, I was just going to ask Julie, because I was particularly really interested in hearing what her thoughts on the holiday tomorrow.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not celebrating. The holiday has slowly through the years I've lost interest in it, and I'm soured on it. I absolutely soured on it now. I abhor the thought of even doing anything, you know, let alone the Black Friday and everything else they've tacked onto the holiday. But you know, the whole situation it's just a fraud as far as I'm concerned, and it's just a facade that they built up, and you know, you add on. My children are all grown now, and when they were younger, you know, it felt like we should get together and do the family thing, because you know, pressure all the other kids that, oh, you know, everybody's doing this for Thanksgiving, and what are we doing? And so you feel like there's pressure to do to join in and do that stuff, but they're all gone now, and everybody's busy, and we get together as a family, but we don't do it on Thursday, and we eat together and have fun and everything, but we don't call it Thanksgiving, and we don't do it on Thursday. So, and the other issue too is the whole food situation. The turkeys and the meat, the chickens and everything, the poultry we get are all raised on these huge factory farms where the animals are abused and they're all cooped up in little cages and packed in, and they can't even move, and it's I don't know, it just grosses me out. I don't even like the thought of eating turkey or chicken unless it's organic or comes from a farm where I know it comes from, how it's raised.
My family, American holidays are weird, I feel, in the Black community in general, because I don't feel that Black people are really into American. I guess I'm generalizing, and of course, this is not everyone. I can't speak for every Black person, but I don't feel like Black people in general are very into American holidays. We usually just use them as opportunities to get together, because it's the few days that everybody, in my family, I have a very large family, so it's the holiday days, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Those are the days that we can pretty much all be sure that most of us, if not all of us, will be off. And so, because we're also busy and we're kind of spread out amongst a couple of states, so all American holidays, or just all, even the 4th of July and things like that, they have always, for me, been kind of absent. What I feel may have been present in some of my particularly white schoolmates or classmates, what their at home celebrations might have been like. I feel it was always different for us, because we weren't necessarily, I said, we were there to celebrate our family and just having the opportunity for everyone to be off and for everyone to be able to go down to my great grandmother's house and eat. I'm actually not celebrating at all this year, just because my mom has to work. We wouldn't normally have some type of dinner, whether on Thursday or Friday, depending on which day. But it's never been for us attached to any patriotism or the story of the Pilgrims or the first Thanksgiving. And even now, going back and learning the extent to which that whole narrative is an entire lie, it's not surprising to me, but it doesn't devastate me, I think, the way it devastates some people when they first find out and start finding out actual hard details and facts. I think that some people are really, really overcome because they've invested so much in this particular image. But because I was never invested in that image, because I kind of am more familiar with the face that is presented here and the face that actually exists, I don't know. It is horrendous to hear about the deaths and to hear about the massive crimes that were committed. That is horrendous, but not because I was ever invested in this particular image of the Pilgrims and how they made friends. And I mean, I never considered that particular narrative any more truer than the ones that they perpetuate about slavery. So, I actually I really like your suggestion, Julie, of doing things not on Thursday. And so now I think I might become an advocate in my family for maybe Friday meals, because at least it's just off that separate day, and it can then be kind of used and repurposed as a more active form of resistance, even though I kind of feel like we already do kind of a implicit form of resistance, but yeah. Not everyone was very into. I've shared a post today of a Native woman kind of detailing some of Thanksgiving, and it got some not negative reactions, but not everybody wants to engage with that.
Yeah, I think they just turn and look the other way because it's something that they don't want to see.
Right.
You know, they just probably halfway don't believe it. And part of the problem with that is, you know, natives traditionally have oral. They pass things down orally. It wasn't written like, you know, like the settlers and colonists had their logs and things that they made. But you know what? Those are probably sanitized too. They probably only put down what they really wanted people to know. We probably don't know the half of it, what actually went on. And the fact that ours is not written is just dismissed, you know, as not true.
As is African oral traditions as well. And the great planters, I know that class definitely didn't put everything down in writing. In fact, when you go back and you even just try to do like scholarship on like pre-colonial Africa, or even what like the African experience was when they were first brought to this continent, a lot of scholars that you read, particularly white, more popular scholars, especially if they're a little bit older, so from like the last 20, 25, 30 years ago, who aren't necessarily adept to more recent and modern research, they oftentimes don't seem to understand that, like, on some of these histories, even things that are written down, you have to read between the lines. There's this great book that's about African resistance in 1776, and the author spends quite a bit of time just talking about examiners of the historical records and their failures to read between the lines, read between the things that great planters aren't telling you. Like they're going, for example, like they're going on to take credit for this cultivation of all of these tropical species of agriculture like rice and cotton and things of that nature, but they don't have any experience with that as Europeans. So that obviously tells us that the African knowledge or horticultural knowledge is much more important than anything that the planters were really bringing. With even some of the inventions made here, like with the cotton gin, with Eli Whitney being conceived of by African people. But if you're a scholar just reading the record plain, you might just take, oh, well, this, you know, planter is saying that he invented this technique. You might just take that at face value, which is what historians, particularly white historians, have been doing for forever. But it's like, yeah, you have to read between the lines. You have to, I don't know. I'm sorry about that little tangent. It's just what you said there really, really spoke to me. About people dismissing oral histories or our histories, but it's a lot of times I think if you really examine things, it's that they don't understand how to interpret or read our histories. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that goes to they don't care either. And Julie touched on that. They don't want to know what really happened or what's really happening or, you know, what have you. It's like what I was saying with my family, the last Thanksgiving I actually took part in. My sister just brushed me off like, no, it's not that serious. Don't, you know, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, and for multiple reasons. And one of them being the, I guess, holding on to, well, I guess holding on to colonialism, I guess you could say. I don't talk or have a relationship with any of my siblings. And that same sister, I remember, was telling me that, you know, I got too upset about her watching and still enjoying the movie Pocahontas, a Disney movie. And how am I the bad guy here? So I went around to some of the Native women that I'm friends with, and they all said the same thing. It's like, why is she doing that, and also why is she defending that? And it kind of reminds me of this whole Nicki Minaj thing because she blocked, like, I think every Native person who tried to talk to her, tried to educate her, and the image, if I accidentally go by the image, I have to scroll past it very quickly. It's just awful. I mean, you have a child, and in the graphic, they enhanced her breasts. And somebody made a point. I think it was Uprocks. That was the one. Uprocks, the article I was reading, said, how could a black woman do that? And just speaking in general, the mess and atrocities they have to deal with. But then thinking about, like, what about all the women, all the girls, I should say, that Boko Haram have kidnapped? And imagine someone drawing a cartoon of one of those girls.
Well, first, I think that we should at least offer some clarification that the drawing, I have actually first thought it was like an album cover that she was promoting. I don't really follow Nicki Minaj or her music, but it was a cover drawn by some white passing Hispanic man. It seems like there would have been some kind of like either knowing about the Nicki Minaj lyrics. There apparently are some Nicki Minaj lyrics that foreshadow or reference something about Thanksgiving, and then this came out. So I guess there was a question about whether this was known about on Minaj's end, and she decided to just use this artist as a means of generating buzz about herself, which I have seen her do in terms of like really like sexually explicit things. I was talking in another forum about sometimes I've seen her play up like a bisexual sexual identity to generate buzz about herself, although I've never heard of her actually dating other women, or I don't know what her sexuality is, but when I first saw it, thinking that it was actually from her team or like was some kind of crazy cover art that she was putting out, I thought it was something somehow related to that. When I found out that it was another person involved, I was a little confused because I'm not as sure what her role in its creation was. It might have been that she just retweeted and put it up on her Twitter as a means of being provocative because it depicted her. And she has an album coming out, and I'm sure that that's buzz for her. The thing is disgusting, and I said that many, many times. Like you have to like scroll past it very, very quickly because it's just, I don't understand why she would want something like that out. And I'm not like a prude or like a sex negative person by any means. I just, knowing the story, the real story of Pocahontas, and just knowing that she was a child, it's just, I don't understand why anybody does not understand by this point that it's inappropriate. I don't know what her role in its creation was, but just the fact that she put it on her Twitter was just really disappointing for me. The conversation that spiraled out of it was, from what I saw, and you'll have to, inform me how wide it got, I guess. It was disappointing in a lot of different, aspects, with replies from people on different camps, but I don't hold this particular situation or any replies that I saw to it as a standard bearer for a relationship between me and Native people. This was dumb. This is disrespectful. It should have never been done. The conversation should have been handled better, but I don't hold anyone who might have responded with an anti-black comment or something like that. I don't hold any singular person as a standard bearer for my relationship with Native people. So I guess I'm just trying to say I'm not going to let this or any other individual negative situation, like define my relationship with that. Like I'm going to just call out wrongdoing where it needs to be called out, and then I guess productively try to talk about how we can have this not happen in the future. Which it really shouldn't even be that much of a conversation. I wish people would just stop using her image, stop bringing up that history, especially if you aren't native or a part of her tribe or a descendant of hers. It's just, I feel like for the last 3 Thanksgivings, I've seen pretty much every time around Thanksgiving, I see like the real story of Pocahontas, the real story of Thanksgiving. I see like these articles come up, and it's probably something to do with the people that I follow or interact with generally, but it's hard for me to fathom like how this hasn't gotten out to just about everyone just about now, that this is wrong, this is not okay.
Well, it was their Instagram that it got put on. But yeah.
I didn't follow the whole long list of comments and things. Did she try to defend it in some way? Or did you just decided to block people that didn't agree with it?
Defend and block, defend and block.
Oh, that's typical Twitter fashion. Block the majority of people, defend the people that you can probably score an easy point off of, or that you feel that you can at least. But yeah, that's pretty standard on Twitter, I see.
So what was her defense of it? Is she saying that she?
What was her defense? If she had one. Or do you know?
I didn't go in to look. I was too just pissed off to even delve into what the hell she was talking about. What the hell how she would defend it or whatnot. Once I heard she was blocking Native people, I was like, geez. Then I saw a Native person say, this is like J.K. Rowling all over again, when J.K. Rowling wrote a book about, like fake Native religions and faiths and cultures, and Native people justifiably got upset, and she blocked all of them. In fact, I blocked by them, and I'm not even Native. I was just upset that she did that. But Julie, you're of the 3 people on this week's roundtable. I mean, what are your thoughts on this whole thing?
It's gross. It's hard to look at, and I noticed it, and I read some of the comments, and I thought, wow, and I just got so disgusted by it. I didn't want to look at it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you have to do this, if you have to shock people with this kind of thing to sell albums or stay relevant or whatever the purpose was, it's pretty sad. I mean, where do we go from here? What are we going to do next? You know, I don't know. It just was sickening.
I don't know. It does make me wonder what level of coordination there was between the artist and her, because sometimes celebrities are just like, I guess, parasites in the sense that like they see something, it involves them. Any buzz is good buzz in this kind of like celebrity-driven culture that we live in. So it's like anything that can get clicks on your site or on your social media page, that stuff all can be monetized. So sometimes it's just like an opportunistic thing, and then sometimes it's more coordinated. It's disgusting either way. But I've never held Nicki Minaj up to kind of be the standard bearer of either decency or just like our thought. She is a great rapper. I'm not trying to denigrate her or put her down. I'm sure she's great at what she does, even though I don't listen to her. But yeah.
She said, this is according to Bitch Media, which is one of the more on the mark outlets out there. They said when Minaj posed for Paper magazine, she consented to this representation. So there you go.
Ew.
And then at the same time, she posted it on her Instagram. She hasn't taken it down, as I thought and predicted. She does not apologize. And the album or the album's called "Break the Internet."
Yeah. So this is a marketing. This is a marketing thing. This is I'm going to generate as much positive or negative feed over a particular topic. So yeah, this is actually even more disgusting than if she had just been opportunistically. Oh, I just saw it. If she had just seen it come across her feed, put it on her thing, and said, "Oh, this will get people to talk to me." This is actually more discussion because it is premeditated. It is more methodical. Whether or not she knew that he was making the image, she ultimately consented to be depicted in that way. So that's, yeah. This is kind of why I'm glad that I grew up kind of like on the outskirts of a small big city. A city with only like 100,000 people or so, and then my grandparents kind of lived in like the rural areas. I kind of grew up away from like celebrity culture. Like I have celebrities who I really like, who I really enjoy, but like I don't ever expect almost anything out of them because they just want money. They just want things. This is like a capitalist society. So they're just out to generate as much buzz, positive or negative, about their thing so that they can sell their image to advertisers so that they can be relevant, especially in this world of what's trending or are you trending on social media. So yeah, this definitely will not make me a Nicki Minaj fan, to be honest. I mean, I wasn't in the first place, but
yeah. And there was a post that she put on there. She deleted this part. Pocahontas.
She had what? Hope? That's not even a good. Oh God, it's just for shock. And I started noticing this kind of around like when marriage equality came about. People, and I kind of put her in this category. Again, I said before, I don't know what her sexual orientation is, but around marriage equality, I started noticing that it was becoming cool for like otherwise straight coded celebrities to like play around with like sex positivity and like queer culture, especially. I saw this with Nick Jonas, where like as soon as marriage equality came about, like every role he was taking was like a gay man because it was considered to be like edgy that he, as a male artist, who most of his fans are young girls, was like it was considered edgy that he was taking like these queer roles. And I kind of have put Nicki Minaj for a long time in kind of that category because, like I said, I never hear her talking about dating women or anything of that nature. So I felt from the beginning that this was just a use of a queer sexual identity, a use of a historical figure, and this kind of like amalgamating of those two concepts to just generate buzz because it contains a historical figure and some very graphic display of sexuality. And I just really, really resent a queer sexuality being kind of commodified in that way, on top of the disrespect that was done to Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it would be great if enough voices would speak out and boycott and stop buying her, her music as a result if she's trying to generate, revenue. If the opposite happened, that would be great. Maybe they'd stop doing this kind of stuff.
I kind of feel like, well, I mean, now we're just getting into my preferences on hip hop, but one of the best things about Cardi B is that like there's been like this rush of just like female rappers kind of who are like trickling back into the mainstream. I kind of feel like Nicki Minaj's position was kind of solidified on the fact that she was the only mainstream female rapper working the circuit for, I mean, quite a few years, but that's not true anymore. And so I think, I mean, she'll probably pay people and hold her own, but yeah, I'm down for a boycott. Although, like I said, can you really boycott someone you don't follow anyway? I mean, it was kind of, I very rarely watch football, so it was like when it was time to boycott the NFL, it was like, oh, sure, got it.
Yeah, I was happy to see that the civil rights organizations spoke out about this Thanksgiving game, though.
What was said about the game, or was it about the Washington team specifically?
Yeah, it was about the Thanksgiving Day game with the Washington team playing. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know
think that, that's Dan Snyder had. I think it's his way of thumbing his nose at all the indigenous people, and it's sickening.
It's weird to think that I don't know, just hearing that one person considers something a slur is enough to make me stop using it. Like, I'm not one of those people who, like, when someone says, oh, hey, I prefer you call me, X, or call me or refer to me as this over that. Like, I've never understood people who, like, sit and argue or just, like, who need to like have this ability to define others by names that are either slurs against them or names that they themselves have created, which make it easier for them to understand you. I don't know. It's just strange. It seems so much easier just to respect and honor people in the manner in which they ask.
Well, that's not the culture that we live in. That's not how we're taught to act like in terms of the mainstream. And there's that. I went to Montessori school.
Oh God.
So it was like this fake facade. Well, this is a facade of equality and diversity, but when the ish hit the fan in any kind of situation with a kid of color or a white child, the white child was always, 9 times out of 10 was right, whether they were or not.
Yeah.
And that's, I've seen that. I used to participate in that nonsense of, if it was a trans person, I would use slurs instead of the correct terminology. I'd say the homophobic stuff, not so much, not to somebody, but just, the whole that's gay thing. That's stupid. But we're taught that our own wants and needs and comfort should be at the forefront all the time. And the problem with Nicki and Matoka, aka Pocahontas, is that Native people, especially Native women, they're not considered human beings. They're Dolores Schilling of Native Trailblazers. She tweeted today that Native people are listed under the wildlife section of whitehouse.gov, or one of the main government sites. So I'm like, okay, they're animals. That's nice. So in Nicki's mind, she's not thinking of treating another human being or people with respect.
Well, it's just like how black people will also participate in like the stratification of black people by skin tone. And so like there was like an episode of this one web show that I was watching where they were talking about like all of like comments from different like high profile like black men talking about like their preference for different skin tones. And they, like the women on the panel, they were talking about how these things function as a way to tell the people who are at the bottom that they are at the bottom. And colonized people, even the people whom like the stereotype is directed towards, you'll often find that they like participate in like the re-stratifying of it or like the perpetuation of it. Like, I'm not trying to make it all clinical or anything like that, but I see too much black people doing the same thing with other black people for me to really have faith that certain people can transfer it to another group, those feelings to another group, and then empathize with them correctly. We have a lot of work to do, I feel, in terms of like building cross solidarity. And I'm starting to maybe approach it from a more academic perspective. At first, I was kind of like, oh, well, you know, I'm going to talk to people and kind of hopefully become friends and kind of talk and hear their struggles, and they'll hear mine. And of course, I'm going to still do that. But I've also been starting to think of this kind of like a diplomatic mission, not in the sense that I want it to be formal, but just because I sometimes feel like as a black person, like when we're talking to like Hispanic people or Native people, sometimes it's like we're like the international department of like a stateless people. Like it's like we don't have a state or anything, but like we're trying to like form this policy of how do we relate to others. And there are people who think that we should focus more on ourselves and then talk to others. So it's kind of like this confusing mix of balancing that desire within, I think, the black community to be insular with, well, my understanding that we need to also engage with different communities because so many of our oppressions are interlocked, even if they're not exactly the same. So yeah, I think we just got to get better at building systems of how to communicate with one another. This kind of falls outside of that because I don't really feel like that is what led to this. I feel like this was just about money. And so that makes it more difficult. But maybe that's also where we might need to consider like the source, and maybe that this person is probably not like the best representation of the partnership we want to have or should have, or is really even involved in building that in any way.
Well, but she is kind of the antithesis of, I don't want to get too negative about my own people, but well, black celebrities for one, and how they view or treat indigenous people, and then I would also say black people in general. I look at it from another standpoint. You look at athletics. The most famous black athlete is an anti-Native person. He is a big Cleveland Indians fan. He lives in Cleveland. That's been his home his entire life. I can basically guarantee you he's seen a Indians protest. He's heard about a Washington Red Slur protest, all that stuff. So for him to keep doing that is very problematic. And the last basketball championship, the NBA Finals last June, LeBron's team played a team with Kevin Durant. Durant, very popular. He won the MVP of that league, NBA, and he is a very big Washington Red Slurs fan, and wears the apparel and parades around it. And I've been to Washington D.C. before. I've seen countless black folks without apparel on. I have just in my, even going backwards myself with the ignorance, seen and heard so much anti-indigenous speech and thought. And I know a lot of that is ignorance, but then it gets to the point where you go from ignorance to willful ignorance, like with LeBron or Nicki Minaj. And the difference is, one key difference with our two people, and I know I'm a broken record when I say this, is that people hear us when we speak. People do not hear Native people when they speak because of the population disparity.
Okay, so the only thing that I would disagree with is that I don't think that people hear us when we speak. And this is the kind of a conversation that I see happening on Twitter sometimes, where I feel certain voices or certain people of color, non-black people of color, have sometimes pointed to the hypervisibility of black people, and they kind of talk about it in these terms that suggest that it's some kind of benefit or boon to black people, when it's actually one of the major tools of mass incarceration, like that constant surveillance, that constant eye. It's also a big vehicle for the appropriation and the theft of our cultural artifacts. But anyway, I don't think that people actually hear us when we speak, generally. I mean, 94% of black women can do something, and everyone can pretty much do something else, and then spend an entire year talking about how they wish that they had done what the 94% of black women had done. But them talking about that doesn't translate to them taking a different action in the future. It's just something for them to talk about. Because I don't follow sports, it's hard for me to say whether any individual is anti or pro something, but I will say I don't think that athletes have quite as much. The taking the knee thing is taking a knee. You have the First Amendment right to technically take a knee. When you get into actual words and speaking, a lot of times they've signed contracts where they cannot publicly denigrate the teams that they either play for or are in the same league as them. Because it's like, if I'm an actor and I'm like shit talking the movie that I was paid money to do, and that in my contract stipulates that I have to do certain types of advertising, sometimes I think that they're also tied up with those things. That doesn't change like professional sports, and this is why I kind of don't follow them, are just disgusting. They're owned by a very small subset of people who, I mean, lots of the black athletes that are like really big icons, like Serena Williams, the Michael Jordans, a lot of them are icons because we know how exploitative those industries are, and those are the people who were able to rise to the top to at least still be somewhat wealthy now that they are probably at the end of their careers. I think a lot of this is a business decision, or I can't speak out against these people because I'm contractually bound to this industry. I don't know if there's a way, if we can like pressure people who maybe have retired to start speaking out first. Usually if you have like a first wave, it makes it easier for like a second wave of people to come in. I'm not sure how we should go about it, but I don't know. I guess I'm just hesitant to use any of those individual people as like the standard bearers of black and Native relations, because I know for a fact most of those people, even if they're aware of certain protests, they're probably unaware of the overriding history and long-term struggle to get mascots removed from like the public domain. They might see an individual protest happening. That doesn't mean that they can conceptualize the over many years. Do you understand what I'm saying? How a movement has progressed over many years, and like all of the psychological and community reasons that you would want and need for those names and images to be taken down and removed from the public view. I'm not willing to ascribe to them that level of agency because they don't have that level of agency even with the Black community. So I can't have faith that they have that level of knowledge about someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand them being reluctant, even if they don't like it, and speaking out, because they'll end up like Kaepernick. They'll be chastised and banned and barred and everything else. So, and they took a lot of work to get where they're at, and they're very lucky. I mean, a lot of people don't make it. But that is an idea. Maybe after LeBron's star burns out, and maybe he can be educated and just to sit down and question him, in an interview and get some real answers out of him. Why did he do this and why did he continue it, and does he know what effect it has on Native people? I'd like to see a really good interview on the topic with him.
There's a book called 40 Million Slaves, and it talks about the exploitative nature of the sports industry in relation to the Black community since like the 20s. And it talks about how starting in the 20s with like horse jockeying and things of that nature, Black people were trying to build their own like circuits of athletes that they could control, and it goes through from the 20s just through various sports up to basketball, baseball with the old Negro leagues. It talks about how white commercial interests each time come in and they erode the ability. It talks a lot about like the structure of the Black athlete and how our athletes used to come directly from our communities, and like there were all of these they're always in the beginning of these sports. There are always institutions that keep them in touch with the communities. They live near us. They go to, or they used to, like in the terms of football, they used to go to predominantly Black colleges, which are located mostly in the South, which means that they would regionally be near family or more likely to be near family. Now that we have another model that kind of distributes all of our athletes all across the country, you're probably not going to school where near you grew up. Our control over our athletes and over the people who represent us publicly lessens over time. So like once you don't have the grandparents and like your parents in your ear telling you to do or not to do something, like this is why it's so hard for us to, like who is our Muhammad Ali? Like Colin Kaepernick is a great athlete. He's great for what he's doing, but like he's kind of trying to fill the role of a Muhammad Ali, whereas in Ali's day, like there were other athletes who were also doing the same thing. Like we don't have, Usain Bolt is not doing that. Like that's a change that's happened in our community because these industries over time are not controlled by us, or long term aren't controlled by us. And so I would need to, we as a community, and this is kind of hard because I know that you don't have the answer to, I don't have the answer to this at least, but we've got to find ways to reconnect, not just our athletes, but our singers and our dancers and all of our artists. Like, I feel like the standard to be a role model in our community has to be higher, not in terms of like what you create necessarily, but what you can speak to as an artist. Because what we ask of public figures across the board, not just in our community, but across the board in the society is so low. I mean, who can you expect to really have intelligent, nuanced conversations?
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. But I will say about LeBron and well,
yeah,
Durant too, for LeBron. The Cleveland baseball team play in a different sport and different leagues than his Cavaliers and the NBA. He could, if he wanted to, depending how much knowledge he has in his head, he could speak out about it and stop wearing name Indian, on his shirt. And when I clarify what I said before, people hear us they just usually 94%, most of the time don't listen to us. They hear us because they hear us to the point of, wait, we can get, forgetting his politics, a president of the entire country. We can get an Oprah Winfrey.
But that wasn't. But white people voted against Barack Obama both elections. A majority of white people voted against Barack Obama both elections.
Right, but they still heard. They
heard. But
they still heard.
50%, more than 50% of them did something else. But his presidency was still positioned as this symbol of, we were in a post-racial America, and look how far the country has come. But greater than 50% of you didn't vote for this candidate. So it's like, I don't know. I still feel like it's like pretending to hear. It's like acting like you hear, or like going through the motions of hearing.
Well, what would be the phrase, in one ear and out the other?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. That's what I'm saying is, when we say something, it goes into their ear. When an indigenous person says something, it's like it's in a void. Nobody even was aware anything was said, and that's the key difference between, or a key difference.
I was reading this book called The White Racial Frame, and it was discussing that the majority culture, and really anyone who's kind of come here post, in the modern age, like, they have a need to forget that history, and Native people in particular, I feel, because they need to believe that the nation is good, or that they are good, or that their ancestors didn't have play in this terrible thing. And if you really know Native people, then you also have to reconcile that history. And because we don't seem to be willing to reconcile that history, they're not going to, I feel, ever look at either of us as whole human beings. Like, we're too large of a population for them to just flat out ignore. So they'll go through the motions of hearing, even though they don't do anything, or it probably won't lead to any substantive change. But because the story of slavery is told in a way, I feel, that makes people feel that it's an old institution that has no bearing on where we are today, I do feel like we get a little bit more participation, or at least engagement, from the powers that be. But if our society is truly going to have an honest dialogue with Native people, then we have to reconcile with what's been done. And I don't know how to make them willing to do that.
Well, that's
yeah. I think there's an underlying element of guilt. It's just it's there, and they don't want to admit it. And we're still in the 1800s, and we're gonna die off. They're the vanishing race, and then you get people like Donald Trump, that's famous for fighting tribes that compete with his casinos. In the past, if you've seen some of his old interviews, he said, well, look at those Indians out there on the East Coast. They don't look like Indians to me, So he defines what an Indian is and what an Indian looks like. And it's like...
And then gets to write off his losses to the taxpayer.
Yeah.
As he's done many times.
Yeah. It's the whole denial thing about our existence and what happened to us and the history overall. So, they don't want to admit it. They just like us to go away.
And they want they wish black people would go away too. You can see the way they refer to us and the way they talk about certain issues relating to us. It's just, we're kind of just like this big undifferentiated thing that if we could just go away, they would be very happy, I feel. Mm-hmm. But because there is a population that they can at least pretend to ignore, I honestly feel that why things are the way they are, and why, I don't know. I try to talk about certain histories with certain people, like about the history of the West. I have like this friend from Kansas who just loves. He's just always talk about like Western history and stuff like that, and like the history of like the continental West of the U.S. And we were having a conversation once, and it's just funny how many rationalizations that people can have for something when they just don't flat out just don't want to deal with it. Like when the subject matter just represents a reality or something that they would have to, it would change the image of themselves in their mind, so they can't deal with it.
Right. And just the word history itself.
Right.
We're in the history books. You know, we're in museums. Our bones, our artifacts are in museums. I mean, they love the glorification, the romanticized version of what it was, but they don't like us
what it is
in the current day. No.
Paul Mooney, he's my favorite comic. He has a bit where he says white folks loved us during slavery because we were doing everything for them for free. But then when we stopped being their literal slaves on the plantation, then that angst and anger and annoyance with us started to really come up over the surface. But then he said if slavery was reinstituted tomorrow, they'd be happy as clams. Because you look at one race was brought here to do free labor as subhumans, and then the other race is supposed to be exterminated and the land taken away. So we both have our own very chilling and traumatic roles that we are supposed to play in this American society. But I would say white people, at least from black folks, I think they do like having us around as long as we stay in our place.
Oh, we are. I feel particularly when I hear people talk about like the history of Africa, I always like to play this game where I let them go on about like their thoughts about Africa, how backwards it is, and what the societies were like. They usually like to play out or play up African slavery, particularly West African slavery, and this is used as a rationalization for, so what we were doing wasn't bad because they don't know anything about West African slavery, that it wasn't an inherited position or anything like that. These are just rationalizations. And what I like to do is I like to ask people after they've done, gotten all that out of their system, I like to ask them, so what books have you read, like, on West Africa or African societies? And I've been asking people that for almost 10 or 15 years, and I've yet to meet one person who could ever even cite one book. People love that image of Native people in a certain place and black people in a certain place because it provides a psychological, well, at least I'm not them. I descend from these conquerors, from these winners. From that psychological boost was actually some of the only things that poorer white people had when the system was kind of first conceived of. That was all they were really getting was this notion that I am better than them, at least. And so, yeah, that's definitely people's beliefs about Africa, people's beliefs about Native peoples. It definitely serves as a head booster for the dominant society.
And to keep you in that primitive mode, and there's a reason for that, and my goodness, people want us to come and speak for Native American Heritage Month, but what do they want? They want to see regalia. They want to hear about medicines and the culture and all that. And
I find that when people pretend to be interested in African things, they actually become a lot less interested when they realize how much of the foodways of the South in general, soul food and stuff like that, the music. Once they find out how inseparable all of that stuff is from Africa, I've actually found that they become less interested because again, they didn't have to reconcile that that's not, this melting pot, quote unquote, is really native land, native culture, black culture, black foodways. I've kind of always felt that the melting pot might be kind of a euphemism that kind of disguises some of the sinister elements of colonization.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course we didn't really like melt, and it's a European style government focus society, and those ideas are aggrandized and everything else is minimized, or if not erased or outright destroyed.
Well, I think that's why what Nicki did, and I would say the majority of us do, and a lot of that is because of ignorance. We have to figure out a way to curtail that and fix it, so we can, one, for solidarity purposes, get on the same page, but two, give Native people the microphone that we have from the standpoint of being heard. It's like with similar to the Me Too and the Weinstein thing. We're seeing something in Western culture, rape culture, that we've really not seen before. With this many people, this many women, this many disgusting men being called out, because people are talking, but they're talking through means or devices where people can hear them. And I 100% believe we need, as black folks, to amplify indigenous voices, because white folks are going to do that for them. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to continue to silence them, denigrate them, and even kill them. So
I don't disagree with that, but I do feel like we also have to just discuss the factors that we're talking about things that people don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can I try to retweet as much as I can, but I was actually talking to some other Native friends about the Keystone pipeline that, of course, spilled after all of these discussions that we were having. And I was talking about I was like, I don't even know if it's beneficial at this point. I live in Texas. I don't know if it's even beneficial at this point to keep sharing people's statuses and news articles, because it's like sometimes people just get their backs up and they've made up their minds. And of course that doesn't mean that we ever stop amplifying one another's voices, but it's like at some point we have to broach that we either have to start building parallel systems or our own things, because this society just does not want to hear. And I don't really feel that us speaking to it more is going to facilitate like a different reaction. That was one of the main things that drew me into wanting to build Native and Black solidarity, because I saw the extent to which the interests of like the dominant society are always going to be the interest of the dominant society. Like they have a vested interest in not hearing and not understanding, just by the nature of the system. And so it was in the realization that I had to start having like other conversations and like working with other people to build a different reality, because I just don't know how much more talking to like the same people we've been talking to for hundreds of years. I don't know how much more it's going to move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like climate change.
And you get this, the same situation on a smaller scale as with these schools that we go to visit about the mascot issues. Once they have their heels dug in, they stop listening, the ears close, and you're talking to the air when you go talk to them. So you go a level higher, you go to the state school board, and if you can get something done, you can get something done. If you can't, then you go a level higher. You get legislation like we have in Michigan, and you force something on them.
Right.
You know, and until you affect the pocketbook in some way, shape, or form, that's the only thing that gets understood.
I actually would be really for a mass movement in the black community just to get the majority of our athletes just to, if not outright resign from the teams, they're probably not going to do that. Just like not play for a while and then tying like the no mascot into that. But there have been so many issues that our athletes have needed to address just from the ways in which they are exploited. And we can turn this into a conversation about body ownership and representation in general. I would all be for that. I am for that. It kind of hurts me to tell them to do that because I know a lot of them. There's another program I can share with you after this show. With the guy who's on the panel is just talking about like how he used sports. Like sports was his only way out of his neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Like he didn't go to good schools. He did not go to university to learn anything. And at UT, the university I graduated from, like less than 2% of black people, black men in particular, graduate from UT. The athletes that go, this is a Big 12 school. Football culture is huge here. Those athletes are not brought to universities to learn. I've seen the schedules that they have. I've seen the classes that they go to or that they get shuffled around in. They're really easy classes. They're there to like make that university money. And so the guy was just saying that like I wasn't brought here to learn. I was brought here to play football. And so it does make me kind of sad to tell people who have kind of hit like the genetic lottery and who this is their opportunity, probably the only opportunity that they're going to have to make this level of income, and knowing how just over the lifespan of a body, you have such a short window to even capitalize on it. And like these are guys, it does hurt me to say that, but we got to start tearing some of this stuff down. As much as it might hurt us in the process, in it coming down.
That's the thing. No matter how we go about this, we're going to get hurt no matter what avenue we try. Whether it's violence, non-violence, whether it's going through our celebrities or whatever it is, we're going to get hurt. So the key is to put our feet on the ground and start marching forward. And I think one key thing that I've noticed, and really I've noticed it a lot recently, but I started noticing it after I don't say buzz, but all the angry noise after Mike Brown and Trayvon were killed. The movement kind of got stagnant, and it still is to a degree because we are far too reactive than proactive. We'll protest till we're blue in the face. We'll say the names, but then what is the actual goal? What is the plan for actually moving forward? How are we going to be proactive and tear the system down instead of calling for the firings of policemen? Let's at the least put pressure on the public to arrest these people, to say, wait a minute, these institutions that are around us are evil, and take whatever steps necessary to move forward instead of moving laterally and moving backwards. But we're like over our hour, but I'll finish by saying this. You're right. The society that we live in, they're not going to listen to. They're not going to agree with either of us. They don't want to hear what we have to say in terms of what the realities of our situations are. But we can't come together as people of color, especially our two people, and actually build something. And to quote a white woman,
Oh God.
There are more of us than there are of them. Chelsea Manning says that repeatedly. There are more of us than there are of them. So if we can come together, we can actually get out of this. That's the tough part. We actually have to keep building solidarity, and when something like the Minaj thing happens, we have to handle it much better on both sides.
I kind of feel like this is I think I said this to you before privately, I feel like this is over the next 25 years, people of color are going to be the majority in this country. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything politically, but I feel like this is going to be probably a 15 to 25-year project if we're talking about completely revamping everything. And, some people think it's going to be more immediate. I just feel like once we have the actual numbers, like to actually revamp the system, things will be different. Or I guess I'm just at least hopeful for that. I hope things don't go the way of violence, although I do fear like rising right-wing violence, especially if they start feeling more and more that they're losing control because, their demographic numbers are going down by no fault of anyone of us. Like, it's not like we've been poisoning white people or killing them.
They do that. They're doing that the whole time. After they lost the Civil War, vigilante killings all over the place.
Oh yeah, I know that, but this is the first time where it's been like you don't even have a Civil War or like anything like that to point to. It's just like the birth rate in the modern world has been what it is for 30, 40, 50 years. It's happening in Europe as well. Like, it's ridiculous the things that we get blamed for. I hope that everyone has a nice time with their family, at least if they are able to get with their families, if that's what you're doing. If you are enjoying a meal tomorrow, then, I hope you at least give thought to the people who lost their lives, who had nothing to do with the story that we were told in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, you want to have the last word tonight?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Derrick said. We do have to come together. We have to find a way to do it as dysfunctional as our own groups are within our own selves. I completely understand that. Our people need to be educated just as much as the general public does, because we have ignorance and assimilation issues galore, and it's a tough fight because they pit our own against us when we try to raise our hands or raise our voices, and then pretty soon we're right back to where we started, because they said, well, you can't get along, you can't agree within your own group, so go away.
That's why they love voices like Ben Carson and like Bill. That's why people love Bill Cosby. I have been done with Bill Cosby for, I feel like, almost 15 years, because he was always into respectability politics, and he's just way too smart not to have known. That's why people loved him for so many years, because he was the person who was telling people, pull your pants up, and just repeating all of the things, giving the dominant society all of the reasons that it already wanted to have for having like these prejudiced beliefs and justifying like this state-sanctioned violence against black bodies. And it's like, don't be that guy. Mm-hmm. Don't be that guy.
Yeah.
But he is that guy in so many areas. Well, y'all, I do hope for all of us to have a good rest of the week and do some healing, some thinking, meditating, whatever we got to do, and recharge going forward. And I'll see y'all soon, and I'll talk to y'all soon. It's been good as always.
All right.
Thank you. All right. Good night, all.
See you next time.
Night.
Good night.